Hello everyone and welcome to one of my most boring videos ever where I talk about philosophy. And you guys probably know that I don't enjoy reading books because I've done already 2 universities. I read books at med school and I read books at law school. So because I dislike reading books, I tend to find things out for myself and expressing them in my own simple words. And I think the advantage is that if I can express them in simple words, other people can also understand them. It's a lot more different than when you listen to an intellectual and he expresses them in complex words. But I think I can help the average person articulate certain things that they probably notice, but they don't know how to put them into words. And one of these things has to do with the concept of everything is political. And I think this is a concept that is very damaging to every freedom-loving individual out there. People who want to live in a free society. So, what is essential for a free society? Because this is the pillar stone. Without it, you don't have a free society. Is the idea that people have a public life and people have a private life. So the public life is where people go out and they're being judged and their behavior, their thoughts, everything is being under scrutiny. And then you have the private life where people go home and they should be allowed privacy. So how does that look like into practice? Well, let's say you have a doctor and he goes to the hospital. Now, when he is at the hospital, he needs to behave in a certain manner. He needs to act professionally. He needs to keep certain opinions to himself. I mean, he's not going to go at the bed of a dying patient and take advantage with the fact that the patient can't get out of bed and start to lecture to him about why he needs to vote Democrat. Those things are unacceptable for a doctor to do. But at the end of the work day, the doctor goes home. And that is where his private life begins. And at home, he is not representing his hospital anymore. So if he wanted to, he should be able to play Xbox and use gamer words as he does so. And if a person were to expose what that doctor is doing, if a journalist would show, oh, look what this doctor is saying when he is playing on Xbox, the villain of that story should be the journalist. It should be the person that exposes the doctor because he is violating the doctor's private time. And he is trying to make the connection between the private life of the doctor with that of the public life. This is how people think in a free society. In a society that you value liberty above all. And as you can know, we don't live in such a society. In fact, people are encouraged to expose what people are doing in their private life as often as possible. And everything a person does needs to be judged at all time. For example, it goes to the extreme where the CEO of Twitter at the time, Jack Dorsey, had a Chick-fil-A sandwich, and that was a political message. Like his eating habits was a political statement. And he was judged severely because of it. So a free society would not do that. A free society doesn't care what you're eating in your free time. Like simply buying food isn't a political statement. So where did this all started from? Well, it started when a neo-Marxist by the name of Gramsci looked at the United Kingdom and he wondered why the class revolution isn't happening. And what he thought was that the reason people aren't rebelling against the system that's oppressing them is due to the fact that they get outraged in their public life, they notice the oppression, but then when they get home, they have an out. And that out was the fact that they can watch football, was the fact that they can read a book, and that calms them down. So the revolutionary spirit doesn't exist as long as people have an out from politics. And this way of thinking is also echoed by a prominent German feminist who at the time coined the phrase that the personal is political. In other words, everything that you do in your personal time actually has political meaning. So people should be judged by what they do in their personal time. In other words, if a woman chooses to be a housewife, she needs to come under heavy public scrutiny. Because what she did is a political statement, and she is hurting the feminist movement by choosing to become a housewife. The correct choice is to become a corporate wage slave, is to find a job at a corporation, work 11, 12 hours a day, because women need to value wealth more than they value anything else. Because that's the only way that feminism can prosper. And this mindset that the personal is political is then translated decades later into the United States, where you have the idea that everything is political. And that is the exact vision of Gramsci. Because now people are encouraged to live in a surveilled state, an actual pseudo-police state, if you will, where if you go to the park and you're having an argument with another person, you need to be aware that at any time someone can pick up a smartphone, record you, put it on social media, get a lot of likes, the video can go viral, and you can be judged by what you were doing in your private time. The conversation that you had can be used against you to get you fired or to get you ostracized or whatever. That is the society that Gramsci envisioned, so that everyone is connected to politics at all times. And this serves two purposes. The first purpose is that people being constantly outraged are more likely to donate money to the activist causes. So in this case, the progressive coffers get filled. People from various NGOs get a lot of donations and a lot of money. And the other purpose is that it can drive certain people crazy. Like if they don't feel represented, if they feel that they have absolutely nothing left to lose, they already got fired, they already got ostracized, no one wants to listen to them, then they can do something crazy. And when they do something crazy, it justifies for the people in power to crack down on liberties. Because it's like, oh, okay, well, we had a person doing something crazy, so we now need to protect everyone, and unfortunately, we're going to have to take some of your rights away. So, for example, if someone issues a death threat on Twitter, oh, now we need trusted safety councils. We need to make sure that people's thoughts are being policed on Twitter in order to keep you safe, to make sure that other people don't issue threats. If a person harasses someone online, well, now the government can say, we'll need to get rid of internet anonymity so we can punish the people that are harassing others online. So we need to take your right of anonymity away, even though you didn't abuse it, but other people did, so we need to keep you safe. Because now we don't live in societies that value freedom, we live in societies that value safety. And safety and freedom are incompatible. Why do you not let a lion in the zoo to return to the wild? Because it doesn't know how to live in the wild. It was born to live in the zoo, and it can only be adapted to live in the zoo. The zoo doesn't give you freedom. The wild gives you freedom. So now you have this new mindset. Like everyone needs to live in the zoo. In the zoo, you get free food, you get free healthcare, you get a roof over your head, you get everything. You don't have freedom. Some people might like to live like that in such a society. If you trust that the zookeeper actually wants what's good for you and is not going to mistreat you. The zookeeper is free, by the way. Very interesting, isn't it? But anyway, right, I digress. So what I'm trying to say is that this is why, with the idea that everything is political, you do not have an out anymore. When you're watching football, you get political messages about racism. When you're knitting, there was actually a famous video where a woman from a knitting community was complaining that instead of people talking about knitting, they were talking about immigration, and they were talking about the wall, and they were talking about literally anything besides knitting. And that is why, because the personal is now political, so every aspect of your life needs to be controlled by the culture. It's very similar to fascism. The definition of fascism is that everything is within the state, nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. And it's the same thing here. Everything is within the culture, nothing is against the culture, nothing is outside the culture. So every cultural aspect needs to be political. And people need to be separated into black and white. Either you're with us or you're against us. There is no in between. There is no shades of gray. There's no more, okay, we can agree on these three issues and we can have a conversation about them. But, like we disagree on everything else. No. You either agree 100% on every single issue, or you're a bad person. You need to be excluded, you need to be canceled, you need to be fired. That is the way things are. If you want the philosophical argument to combat the idea that everything is political, then the answer is yes, everything is indeed political. Every single person has some desires and they have some will on how society should function, and they try to change society to be more to their liking. So a religious person would prefer if everyone was religious. An atheist person would prefer if everyone was an atheist. I think like the only people that aren't political would be probably hermits, people who just isolate themselves from society, but even they are probably political because they want to be alone. Like a hermit wouldn't like if 5 other hermits moved next to him and opened the Starbucks. So the idea is that yes, everything is political, but everything shouldn't be partisan. So in other words, people who are political when engaging certain activities should not be partisan. They should leave their politics at the door. And the left believes that this is possible because they are the ones promoting removing biases from people. So they have a science which is done to go not just a person's thoughts, but a person's inner psychological thinking and removing those biases from that person. So the science exists. It's made by the left. So if you believe that is the case, like you can actually remove unconscious biases from people, surely you can also agree that people can join certain activities and behave in a manner that is not partisan. Because if society does not have those activities, number one, it's not a free society. And number two, it leads to conflict. If you're going to automatically join a place and categorize people in black and white, good people versus bad, and every single part of society has that, you are going to reach a point of conflict. And the only way you can have a society like that is either if you have a police state where everyone is surveilled at all times to make sure that no one gets crazy, or you just have the conflict and one side physically dominates the other. And I think both of these can and should be avoided. So just have like certain elements of society, like sports, for example, where people are told that you can only join this club where we talk about sports if you leave your politics at the door, you leave your unconscious biases at the door, then that is what people need to create. This is how you BTFO the progressives. Everything is not partisan. So what does partisanship mean? Partisanship means that you are a member that is a strong supporter of a cause. So you go out of your way to support that cause wherever you are. You're pretty much like an extremist, right? Because while everything is political, if I go to a dinner table with my family, with my friends, I try to avoid talking about football. I try to avoid talking about religion. And I try to avoid talking about politics. Why? Because you want to have harmony. You want everyone to feel good at that family gathering. Like you're trying to cohabitate with your people. A revolutionary doesn't want that. A revolutionary wants, when he goes to any event, whether it is a family gathering or whatever, he wants to identify who are his allies and to exclude who are his enemies. Even though those people might be his family, even though those people might be his citizens. And that way of thinking will only lead to conflict. It will pit neighbor against neighbor. It will pit family member against family member. You cannot have a society like that. All you're doing is you're eventually going to bring down a conflict where one side will dominate and oppress the other. And then once you manage to do that, it's going to be another conflict, because even the people who won, they're going to start talking about, all right, but now we have a new set of views. And I keep giving J.K. Rowling as this perfect example, because everyone knows who J.K. Rowling is. And she's a very progressive person, feminist, you know, she supported censorship, she supported all of the nonsense. But she disagreed with one point. She disagreed with the idea that she doesn't believe men can have uteruses. And because of that, she was accused of, and I'm not kidding, she was accused of being part of transgenocide, and now she's getting canceled. The only difference is that she's too rich to be canceled, so they're a little bit ineffective. But what happened to J.K. Rowling is happening to a lot of people. And just because now J.K. Rowling's way of thinking is the problem doesn't mean that in the future there's not going to be another problem. And this has actually happened in history. Like, you had countries where you had religious conflict amongst Christians. You had certain Christians who were Catholic and certain Christians who were Protestant. And they would have it at each other. I mean, there were severe clashes between neighborhoods with people getting injured or killed because of that. Like, people disagreed on their religion. The personal was political, like what they did in their own homes. The fact that they worship God in the wrong way was now political. And it ends up with conflict. And you can't have a society like that. You can't have a nation where people are fighting with each other. And they're having like mini nation states within the nation and they're going at each other. It's impossible. You're not... It's very similar to the Buddhist philosophy that the warrior monk needs to have inner peace. Like, the peace needs to be within, and all of the aggression needs to be directed outside at whomever is attacking the warrior. That is the correct way of achieving balance. You need to have balance within yourself. And in order to have balance within yourself, you need to agree to a certain percentage that people are allowed to have a private life, and you are allowed to have some differences. If you're going to start attacking people over the smallest difference, there is no inner peace. You will not be able to cohabitate. I mean, imagine this scenario. Let's say you're on a plane, and next to you there's a lady with an infant in her arms, and the infant starts crying. Now, you don't like that, obviously. You don't appreciate the fact that there is noise pollution. Maybe you're trying to sleep or whatever, but you can't because the kid is constantly crying. And you're not going to get up and start shouting at the lady, are you? And you're not going to chastise her, like, why did you bring your infant on a plane? What is wrong with you? Because if you do that, society will judge you. Like, every other passenger is going to look at you with frowny face. Now, the other passengers are obviously disturbed by the sound. Like, they don't enjoy it, but they put up with it. They put up with it because it's the only way you can live in a society, by putting up with certain things that you don't like, but you're trying to be understanding of the situation. Now, what the progressives have done is that they perverted that tolerance. So they would create NGOs that would state that every single plane needs to have infant representation. There needs to be 5 crying infants on every single plane. And if you disagree with that, then you're literally just like the man in the previous example who got up and started shouting at the lady. If you disagree with them, you're against the infants. So by perverting society in that way, now people are against tolerance, but at the end of the day, tolerance is a good thing. This is why you don't see the word tolerance being mentioned anywhere in the media nowadays, because the progressives won. They're not interested in tolerance. But tolerance to a certain degree, to a certain reasonable level, is actually desirable. You can't have a society if every single person would impose his will on everyone else, if every single person would act like a selfish child towards everyone else. And regardless of the circumstance, regardless of what's happening, unless it's your way, you're going to start a conflict. A society like that just cannot function. It's not a place where you would want to live in. And this is the problem where we're at. And this is what happens when you have a society that values safety over freedom. And the only outcome is going to be that a group of people is going to oppress another group of people. And once that is done, the oppressors are going to realize that they now need to oppress each other. And you get to see this happening at a microcosmos on various forums. I used to follow Atheism Plus, which was a movement within the atheist community, which actually did destroy the atheist community, where they claimed you're not an atheist unless you're atheist plus social justice. So people agreed, like some people agreed, some people didn't, that the atheist plus managed to excommunicate the other atheists from the movement. And once they accomplished that, they looked amongst each other and they were like, okay, we're all atheist plus here, but you need to be of a certain demographic in order to be able to speak first and in order to blah, blah, blah. Some people didn't agree, so they got banned. And then the purity spiral continued until the only people that were on the forums were the moderators, and funnily enough, they started banning each other. It's a destructive way of thinking. It does absolutely nothing but create chaos. And there is a reason why societies who believe that the personal is political and that everything is political require the police state to function. It required constant boot on people's faces in order to make sure that everyone is complying and everyone is doing what they're supposed to do. Free societies do not require the boot. And that is what people need to take from this, as well as the fact that while everything is political, not everything is partisan. In fact, it should be in certain communities that value freedom, like partisans are not allowed. It's what the right couldn't articulate and why they lost the argument. Because they would say, all right, this is football. We don't want politics in football. And then people would say, oh, but the anthem is political. And you have this that's political. Of course, everything is political, even football. So you're a hypocrite. No, the correct answer is yes, football is political. Of course it is, because you support your national team, you support your home team and whatnot. It is political, but it's not partisan. You don't have the presidential debates on the football field.